Thank you, Sally Ann. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to see you here. Thank you so much. And thank you to Bloomberg for allowing me to be here. This incredible headquarters building. As a real estate guy, I'm always completely wowed by these type of buildings, and in the interest of full transparency, as a very modest Bloomberg subscriber, I may have paid for a little square centimetre of paint somewhere. But I remember the previous HQ because when I was chief executive of a multinational billion-pound stock market listed company, I used to come and present to the analysts and investors and shareholders. But it's a good moment amongst all of the sort of the noise of the budget in a couple of weeks' time, actually to sort of take a strategic step back and sort of say, where are we? What's going on? And what's the future? And the reality is, I think all of us in this room, those in the world of business, know that we are not in a great place. We have two critical issues that we need to talk about and face into. The first is we've got a growth crisis. And the second is we've got a debt crisis. And I'm just going to show this evening two graphs just to sort of demonstrate the sort of thing that's going on and could happen over the coming years. So the first graph, hopefully, will appear, fingers crossed. This graph there, you won't have seen this. This is per adult, based on real figures, 2025. This is the blue line is GDP per adult. And as you can see, in the last 7 years, it's basically gone nowhere. Per adult, no GDP growth whatsoever. Indeed, in the last 10 years, it's barely shifted. Not even a round of drinks, frankly. But the red line is the national debt per adult. And 15 years ago, if that was just over 70% of GDP per adult, you can see the trend. It is heading relentlessly, give or take 95% per adult. That trend is very bad. And that takes us to where we are today. And you then think, well, how much growth is there? Everybody's talking about the lack of growth. Well, a year ago, just over a year ago, in the OBR's report, they had a series of scenarios as to what might happen to GDP, relative debt, relative to the size of GDP in the economy. And they had a range of scenarios. And everyone's forgotten the low productivity scenario. And yet, what are we hearing from the OBR at the moment? Productivity is down. So if we look at the next graph, this is the scary one. Because this shows, hopefully there, that shows the red line currently, debt to GDP, a whisker under 100%. And for the next decade, based on the low productivity growth scenario, effectively, debt to GDP is not going to go down. But then the scary bit is in the subsequent 10 years, when relentlessly it'll climb. 20 years' time, it'll be 150+%. In 2050, everyone talks about 2050 relative to net zero. In 2050, if we don't change course, debt to GDP in the UK will be 200%. We all know that is unsustainable. That is a rapid route towards bankruptcy. We cannot tolerate this, and we cannot ignore that graph. It is the starkest graph that everybody should be focusing on. Now, some of us, we're old enough to remember when we really had lots of growth. But to get growth, you need a critical thing. You need to accept the concept of risk. Risk actually is a good thing. We say the biggest risk in life is never taking one. And if you want a risk-free return, we all know that's not going to generate a lot. If you want growth, you've actually got to take a sensible, calculated amount of risk. So you then say, well, what's sensible and calculated? Well, it's almost 40 years ago since the city had what many of us will remember and was called Big Bang. And it was the moment of change in the City of London, the moment of deregulation, when everything changed. And of course, financial services and the healthy growth of the economy are intrinsically linked, like a sort of umbilical cord. When financial services are doing well, the UK economy is doing well, and vice versa. And back then, in the 80s and 90s, we almost got complacent of growth between 2.5% to 3.5% year in, year out, with a couple of exceptions. And we'd sort of say if it got below 2%, we'd get a little bit worried. Below 1% was like a moral recession. Now, you get to 1% and they break out the champagne. That's not growth. That doesn't give us options. And if we have no growth at all, which is the last 3 months, for example, then that's the graph that we are facing because of all the liabilities that we're talking about. So smart risk is actually a good thing. And after the Big Bang for sort of 15 to 20 years, generally things were working out pretty well. But you then have to look at what's happened in the last 10 to 12 years here in the city, in financial services. And I think most people would recognize there's a problem. And you've only got to look at the simple data with regard to IPOs. 2011 to 2015, averaging about 100 a year. 2022, it was just 42. 2023, just over 20. Last year, I think it was 18. And this year, well done, I think we've got to 13. That trend is disastrous. You all know what that means in terms of M&A activity, growth. And you say, well, what's going on? Well, companies, it's worse than that because the number of companies listed on stock exchange, I think in the UK now, is 40% lower than in 2008, 25% lower than a decade ago. Companies are delisting. They're relisting elsewhere, very often primarily in the US. They're being bought out by private equity. We've got a serious problem. So then we have to say, well, what is the problem? And our contention, my belief, is that we've primarily got a major problem of overregulation. Things are so complicated. When I sat next to the chair of a major retail bank just a few weeks ago, and he said to me, 15% of his staff are in compliance, I thought, wow. I mean, if he'd asked me to guess, I'd have said 2, 3, maybe 5 at a push, 15%. And you then say, well, okay, how's that regulation, how's that compliance going? I mean, we've got the Bank of England, we've got the PRA, we've got the FCA. Amongst them all, give or take, it's about 10,000 regulators. And people think that's going to save us all. Well, let's just look at the track record, shall we? And let's be really challenging about it. Did it stop the PPI scandal? No. Did it identify the risks of the financial crash? No. Did it prevent the car loan scandal? No. Did it prevent the gated scandal of open-ended real estate funds, something that I've been talking about for many years? No. Basic common sense. Did it spot and prevent the LDI crisis, which was fundamentally a critical part of the bond market crisis in September 2022? That was a catastrophe. What's the point of regulators, thousands and thousands of them, if they're not going to do the job properly? These are the difficult questions that we have to ask ourselves. Fundamentally, 10,000 regulators have not stopped those sort of scandals. And many of those actually were about common sense. I think when you looked at the LDI scandal, lots of people sort of knew it was there. Did it really make sense for lots of pension funds to buy long bonds yielding 0.75%? Where's the growth in that? So I think it's just a fundamental flaw in common sense. So those are the challenges. And if you overregulate, don't be surprised if the evidence is that businesses are not listing here. And it's even worse than that. Smart people creating business are leaving. So here we are, 40 years, less than a year, 39 years on, after the Big Bang. My contention, our contention to you, is that now is actually the time for the big reform. We have to stand back and say, how's it going? What can we do better? And in a sense, we've actually got a bit of time. We're in the early stages of an electoral cycle. So we could actually ask some really sort of big picture questions, like with a clean sheet of paper, almost like a sort of brainstorming session in the boardroom. Come up with good ideas, great ideas, mad ideas. That's what brainstorming is all about. But my contention is that we need to look at 4 critical areas in order to try and generate growth, confidence, investment, and belief. Because if we don't, then already the evidence is there in terms of where businesses are listing their companies, where they're raising capital, where they're raising the debt, and where the brightest, smartest entrepreneurs are going. And there are sort of 4 critical areas that I just want to touch on. The first one in terms of regulation. So we just look at the current situation. We've got MiFID II, 30,000 pages, 1.4 million paragraphs. I'm sure they're all seared on all of your hearts. But as I've just shown, that hasn't actually helped. So is it possible to say, well, maybe the precautionary approach to regulation of trying to de-risk everything isn't working? Maybe we need to go to a proactionary approach. Maybe we should say, okay, is it possible? I don't know, but I'll come to the suggestion. Is it possible to turn 30,000 pages of regulation that's failing the city and failing our economy into 100 pages of proactionary regulation, but with a very clear difference, that you have a proper sanction, a proper deterrent when things go wrong? How many people in the UK went to jail after the financial crisis? I think the answer is 0. So maybe if you had a proper sanction and a proper deterrent alongside that proactionary principle, then I think we have to be prepared to look at it. It's really, really important. We have to ask ourselves challenging questions about the FCA. How's it going? And then we need to look at the PRA and the Bank of England, the MPC. Now, this is the moment where most politicians daren't go there. There is a fear in Westminster that if you mention the Bank of England, you might be perceived as interfering with their independence. No, you're not. All we're suggesting is it's not unreasonable, 27, 28 years after independence was given the Bank of England, to say, how's it going? Have we got the constituency of the MPC right? Have we got the right number of members? Have we got the voting structure right? Have we got the right calibre of people? Is it right that the Bank of England should have a majority? I think we need to seek people's views on all these absolutely critical issues. People will know that I've been challenging the whole issue of whether or not to pay reserves, pay interest on the QE reserves in QT. And Nigel and I had a very genial meeting with the governor just a few weeks ago. But you've got a situation where Parliament has not debated a £200 billion decision, which is a fiscal decision, on the issue of QE and QT. So you have to ask this question. Have we got that right? Is the mandate for the Bank of England right? Not unreasonable, give or take 30 years on, to say, well, okay, you've got a mandate to control inflation. What exam mark would we give? Jury's out, I would say. And then, of course, it's got a stability mandate. Well, financial crisis, bond market crisis in 2022, again, the jury's out. Should it have a growth mandate? Many great economists will say definitely not, some of whom are in this room today. Others will say, well, maybe. We've got a crisis of growth. What we should absolutely do is be so afraid that you daren't talk about it. I think we should talk about it. So As part of this big reform, we're going to set up working groups to look at these 4 key areas. And regulation is the big one. All of these issues, and we want people to feed into this with your thoughts, and they will be very different. But if we're not even prepared to look at it, to debate it, to question it, then we've got absolutely no chance of changing course. The second key area is what is very dear to our hearts: SME growth capital. SMEs are the bedrock to the UK economy. And Nigel talked about it on Monday. We feel that so passionately. Alarm clock Britain. But just this morning, hearing from a couple of tradespeople, they set their alarm at 4:30 to drive to London to go to work. But actually, for fast-growing businesses, where's the growth capital? 40 years ago, I remember 3i with its regional offices. You could get a 3 or 4 page letter from which you could get 75 to 100 grand capital investment. Now, yes, the world's moved on. 3i's done incredibly, but what's replaced it? And we have to say, what are the ways to ensure that on round 2, 3, 4 of fundraising for your great potential unicorns in the UK, whether it's in fintech, whether it's in life sciences, or whatever, we've got great entrepreneurs and creators, but they're all struggling to raise the appropriate amount of durable finance in order to continue to grow here. And that's a tragedy, because then, of course, their option is to sell out or to go and list somewhere else. So we have to look at the whole structure, including the way we tax growth capital for SMEs. Now, originally, of course, 40 years ago, the AIM market was, in a sense, that's what it was set up to do, and it did pretty well. But the reality is the AIM market now has the fewest number of companies listed on it for 25 years. So that's not going in the right direction. So we have to relook at this. And I know people have sort of thought about it and talked about it, and previous Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, he came up with the Edinburgh reforms, but it was tinkering at the edges. It wasn't really with a clean sheet of paper saying, we need to completely relook at this. But actually, given where we are in the electoral cycle, I think we can. And I think we have to be brave enough to ask these big, big questions. So you've got regulation, you've got SME growth capital, and then we've got the third one, pensions and savings. Vital, but so unbelievably complicated in the UK. Where do you start and where do you begin? Where do you finish? You know, it's not the most glamorous topic. I did somehow retain the press for 25 minutes when I talked about the local government pension schemes back in September. And I was fairly critical of the cost of managing those LGPS schemes, which is too expensive and they're underperforming. But in reality, we have to, again, ask really serious questions about the way we do pensions in this country. And we'll have to look, we need the best of the best from elsewhere. In Australia, for example, they have a much more glamorous word for pensions. It's called a super. You're much more likely to sit in a pub in Australia and talk about the performance of your super to your 21-year-old neighbour than you are here in the UK talking about the performance of your pension. That's a mindset thing, but it's a simplicity thing. And we need to look again seriously at the whole issue of defined benefit pension schemes in the public sector. And already, I've mentioned it in the last sort of 24 hours, and they're coming at me hard and fast. And that's fine. That's sort of what we do in the world of politics. But the liability for the unfunded pension schemes in the public sector in the UK has grown in the last 20 years from about £750 billion, no one knows what that looks like, to somewhere between 1.5 trillion, according to the OBR, but some think it could be as high as 2.5 trillion. What we do know is that it's growing, that liability, off balance sheet, is growing at somewhere between 30 and 50 billion a year. This is not sustainable, and that is the reason, one of the key reasons, why that line, that red line, is heading towards 200% in the next 20 to 25 years. So we have to have a grown-up discussion about unfunded defined benefit pension schemes. And I don't think it's unreasonable to sit down with the unions and to say, look, for new employees, we can do this differently. The private sector did this 20, 25 years ago. But if we're not even prepared to have that discussion, then we're just not going to make the progress that we need to. Because those numbers, that increasing liability, and I touched on it on the LGPS, but it is completely unsustainable. And then you look at ISAs, cash ISAs, stocks ISAs. Again, let's ask the question, if there's 350 billion of cash in ISAs, well, how's that helping the growth of the economy? Question mark. Why should you give tax relief to leave your money sitting in cash? Should we, for example, say, well, yes, of course you can have tax relief if you invest it in UK stocks, because we're short of UK equity capital here. Those are the sort of things that I think we need to have a proper relook at, under a whole relook of pensions and savings. And I know there'll be all sorts of different views, but this is the right time to step back and ask those questions and try and come to a better place. And then fourthly and finally, the joys of taxation. We are lucky enough in this country to enjoy the largest tax code in the world. A mere 24,000 pages, no one knows within 1,000 pages how long it is. What I can tell you is that it's about 5 times the combined works of Harry Potter, and nothing like as much fun. And that's great for accountants. But when did you last see a child running around a playroom saying, "Daddy, Daddy, I want to be an accountant"? And when you look at countries like Hong Kong, that they have, give or take, 300-page tax codes, and you have other countries that they head towards a flatter tax system, I don't think it's unreasonable to take a step back and to say, is it possible? And I don't know, but we must look at it. Is it possible to turn a 24,000-page tax code into something, give or take, 500 pages over 1 parliamentary term or 2 parliamentary terms? Is that possible? If so, what have you got to do? What does it look like? It might not be, but if you don't ask these questions, we know we're overtaxed, we know it's too complicated, we know we've got compliance, 15% of banks. I think we've got to ask these serious questions. And just today, you sort of look at the madness of regulation and where we are. We've got the BBC producing an incredible report about the illegality of vape shops and barber shops on our high streets, all in front of our very eyes, literally in plain sight, every high street in the land. And yet all of us driven mad by KYC. I mean, it's the big one. It's even worse than GDPR, pressing the cookie on your phone. And you sort of say, well, what's the point of KYC when you've got all of this money laundering and illegality going on in plain sight? And even to list a house, you have to do KYC. It drives us all nuts. You can check the MOT status of anybody's car if you go to the gov.uk website, updated once a year. Why can't we have our KYC updated once a year with our utility bill on the government website with our national insurance number, that all of the lawyers and estate agents and whoever else is interested can go and check? Completely changes all of that compliance. These are the big questions that I think we've got to ask in order to ease the process of regulation and complication in order to create productive growth. So what I say to you is, this is the moment to have 4 working groups, and we've already got a number of great people to come and work in some of them, and to take 6 months to take all of the great ideas, and some of you in the world of management consultants, hedge funds, brokers, investment banks, my ask of you, set up a small team of some of your brightest folk and set them this challenge. We all love competition. Come up with the best ideas in these different areas. And our working group will also come up with their ideas. And if we feed that in over 6 months, and then if we say we'll take 3 months to look at those ideas, produce a report, then in 9 months' time, just in time for the anniversary, the 40th anniversary of Big Bang, we can say, folks, actually, this is the way that we can change things. This is the way that we can unleash a proper growth strategy for the UK. Yes, the Chancellor's got their challenges, her challenges at the moment, trying to balance the books short term. But we need to step back and look at the medium to long term. We need to recognise that risk on that graph there and say that is not acceptable. But in order to change course, folks, we need your help. We need you to contribute to these working groups. Some people may want to say, I'd love to be on one of these working groups. Yes, please, we just need a bit of your time. They're going to operate under an independent think tank, the Centre for a Better Britain. Sort of like WYSIWYG, it does what it says on the tin. And that's independent of reform, so don't worry, and you can be anonymous or you can be named. That's great. But we need people's help. We need great people, great minds, to come forward and say, 40 years after the Big Bang, now is the time for the big reset. Now is the time for the big rethink. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time for the big reform. Thank you very much.
So, Richard, thank you for that and setting out the reform agenda going forward. I've got a couple of questions for you before we open it up to the audience. First and foremost, I must say the thought of MiFID II being 100 pages is very welcome to my ears, having spent 2 years on secondment at the Treasury dealing with onshored MiFID post-Brexit. But I think it's a little late for that now for me, but maybe for others. You talked about risk and calculated risk, and regulatory reform has been a big part of the reforms UK's sort of agenda. However, markets remain very alert to fiscal credibility, particularly after the turbulence of the last years. How would you reassure investors, many of whom are in this room, that tax cuts, regulatory reform and so forth would be fully costed and sustainable and get that calculated risk balance that you mentioned?
Yeah, and so Nigel gave a big press conference on Monday talking about the economic thinking. Whether you're at home or at work, or whether you're running a council or a country, you cannot keep spending more than you're earning for very long and expect it to end well. At some point, your lenders are going to say, hang on, folks, how are you going to pay us back? And if that graph goes anywhere near that 200% in 20, 25 years, we know at some point there's going to be a problem. And so what we've said is the first thing we've got to do is we've got to cut the vast amount of unproductive, wasteful spending. That's the key. And we're starting to do it in the councils, and Monday the 17th, I'll be going into that in great detail. But the great thing about regulatory reform is that actually, in almost all cases, it doesn't cost anything. It unleashes enormous growth. I mean, I'm a real estate guy. The best thing the Tories did in the early 2010s was to make it basically easy, without planning consent, to convert an office building into residential units. It unleashed the power of growth, and it cost nothing. So I would say that, of course, we want smart, safe regulation. But I think we can achieve that. And because we've got a bit of time to do this, we can step back and say, okay, let's welcome all these ideas and say, okay, what works? And then put it out to consultation, say, well, we like this idea, but actually it may not quite work. The risk might be too high. That's why you've got to ask these questions and get everybody's feedback into it. And I think the thing is, once you're in, anybody who's in government basically doesn't have time to do this. The pressure's too great. Whereas we're in the position where we can ask these questions. We're basically from the world of business. So that's where we're at with it.
Great, thank you. And you touched on the IPO situation, and in fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to the CEO of the Hong Kong regulator, who was talking about the Hong Kong exchange, where on one day they had 7 IPOs.
Wow.
And actually have had 80-something this year, I believe, and 200 in the pipeline. Now, you said that British firms were moving away to the US because of overregulation. that can't be the only reason they're moving away. I mean, how do you attract listings? And kind of going on from that, I mentioned in my introduction, you know, the UK has been fated as the financial centre of the world, but that is now being threatened in some instances by America, in some instances by China. How do you improve the UK's attractiveness?
Well, I think both from the cost of listing here is enormous. The regulatory burden. There's almost not much difference between AIM and between the main market nowadays, which is a shame because AIM was a great thing when it was set out. But I think we've got to look around who's doing what elsewhere in the world. And if in all these different things, if you say, well, actually over there, in Hong Kong, this is how they do it. In Estonia, that's how they do it there. In Australia, that's how they do pensions. If we take the best of the best, then I think we can get to the right results. There's also the issue of inheritance tax. We've spoken about our ambition. This is critical. In order to keep people here and in order to attract people back into the UK, the brightest, the best, the most successful entrepreneurs, actually, we've got to get rid of inheritance tax. It's a major, major block for retaining people in the UK, and that's a tragedy. So that's a critical thing that Nigel has spoken about with great passion in recent weeks, months.
Okay, great. And you said, we were talking earlier, and I think Nigel's spoken about it, and you have, that if you were to get into government, you would look to industry to get people who have expertise in particular areas to bring that expertise into government. Can you expand on that and how you see that working?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are sort of slightly mad in terms of when you look at the ministerial sort of shuffle that goes on. And I think under the Tories, in the last 14 years, there were 18 rail ministers. So don't be surprised if you haven't got much consistency and you end up with a muddle like HS2. So actually, if you really want to understand the life sciences sector, which is incredible, maybe actually we should have a brilliant life scientist entrepreneur coming in for 2 or 3 years and being a minister to give us that expertise. It's a sort of variant of the model that they enjoy in the US. And I think in all these different areas, we've got to be brave enough to say, MPs are wonderful. It's an incredible job, but we're not experts in everything. I mean, we're lucky. We come from the world of business. We understand that space. But there's many other spaces where we need the experts. And I think we've got to be brave enough to say, let's bring that in. And it should be part of our patriotic civic duty. If you get the knock on the door and say, Nigel wants you to come and help for 3 or 4 years with that expertise, then that's how it's a bit like how the takeover panel works. You get seconded to it for a while, you then go back into the private sector, and it looks fantastic on your CV, and the city is grateful.
Great, thank you. And sort of jumping around a bit, but it's been talked that or spoken about that you're going to scrap net zero subsidies. What guarantees can you give investors that to ensure that you will still put billions into Britain's energy future?
Well, that's the critical thing. At the moment, we've got an energy crisis. I mean, I've talked about the debt crisis and the growth crisis, but 20, 25 years ago, no one was talking about the price of electricity. No one was talking about the risk of running out of electricity or it being rationed. And yet now, that's what everybody is talking about. Our electricity price is too high. There is a direct link between the growth in renewable generating capacity and the growth in electricity prices to the highest in the developed world, whether it's industrial or domestic. And so what we say to people is, look, we love technology. Solar panels on roofs, fantastic. But solar panels covering thousands of acres in Lincolnshire, 100 square miles, surrounding villages, hundreds of pylons, how is that environmentally friendly? I don't think it is. And we need more gas-fired power stations, and we need more nuclear. We used to lead the way in nuclear. So we say to investors, that's the place to be investing your money. We've said to the industries, the North Sea oil and gas sector, get your license applications ready. Because if we're heading towards government, we need to know that you're ready to go. And I actually think it's grossly negligent to have huge quantities of energy treasure. That's what oil and gas is. It is treasure. To have that and yet to leave it underground. Every other nation that has got that treasure is extracting it as fast as it reasonably can. And so we have a very different view from the other main parties. That's the joy of democracy. It's not always welcomed, but there we are.
Indeed. One more question before we hand over to the audience. You have a room full of businesses and investors here. Maybe some of those will be ones that one day you tap on the shoulder. But what would you say to them in your final sort of message to them?
Growth. We have to get growth back into the UK, and to do that, that does involve some smart, sensible, calculated risk. And so we have to be prepared to look with a clean sheet of paper at all of these issues. And it's possible, you look at the whole thing, we spend 9 months doing it, and you say, actually, give or take, it's okay. Well, if that is the conclusion, then I worry that's where we're heading. We're heading to a debt crisis. So I think we can do better. Those of us that remember 2.5%, 3.5% growth in the 80s and 90s, what that does is that gives you options as to where you then, as a government, where you spend your increasing tax revenues. And those of us in the world of business, we do understand, well, first of all, we know how to spell the Laffer curve. We understand what it is, and we're pretty sure where we are on that Laffer curve. We've headed over the top, and we're heading in the wrong direction, and we've got to change course.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to open it out to the audience. We have some roving mics, so if you can wait till the mic comes to you and then give your name and your organisation. So who has a question? Where's the microphone? Alex? We've got... Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Mauricio Alencar from City AM. You've talked a little bit of the financial crises in the past and hindsight. So right now, are we facing a risk of a private credit crisis or an AI bubble burst? And just secondly, very quickly, you've talked about the Bank of England, PRA. You haven't talked about the DMO, the Debt Management Office. Would you ask questions of them and how many index linked gilts they issue? Thanks.
Thank you. Great question. So on the private credit market, I actually checked earlier this week. In the local government pension schemes, in our councils alone, I think we're exposed to over 2 billion of private credit. I think the whole of the LGPS is possibly exposed to give or take 15 to 20 billion. And people are very worried about it. But where are the regulators screaming about it? Question mark. With regard to the DMO, yeah, actually, again, I've got some serious questions. Why have we got, give or take, a third of our debt is in linkers when we're a nation that's we've always had a bit of an inflation problem. Are they doing the right thing? And I don't think it's unreasonable to challenge it and to question it. I know that'll upset some people, but
thank you.
We have a habit of that.
Lucy? So I will come to the other side, so please be ready.
Hi, Lucy White from Bloomberg. Richard, your party has been issuing a lot of clarifications in recent days. For example, that the two-child benefit cap will now only be lifted for working households, and that you have that you're not saying that reform will cut council tax, despite that being on leaflets around the election last year. Are you worried that with each of these clarifications, the public thinks you're losing a little more credibility? And in terms of some of the issues you've raised tonight, on Bank of England independence, would you go so far as to take back the Bank of England independence? And do you have an idea as to what your fiscal rules might be?
So on the issue of councils and council tax, actually, those of us at the head of reform, we never said we would cut council tax. We always said that we would cut waste, improve productivity and efficiency. And I know there's a couple of leaflets. When you've got 1,600 candidates, actually, Nigel and I and various others, we don't actually read every single one. So there might have been the odd person, but the reality is we always said we would cut the waste, cut unproductive spending, and on the 17th of November, you'll hear from me some of the great successes we're achieving. Work in progress, it always will be. You never end that process. But with regard to the Bank of England, I don't think anyone is really seriously saying relook at the independence. But I think we have to have the courage to say, is it perfect, currently constituted, or could it be improved? I mean, that's what we all do in business. You make a decision, investment decision, and you monitor it. Some of it's working, great, push on. Some of it needs tweaking and adapting. That's what you do. We have to have the courage in the world of politics to do that and not be afraid of it. So I think that was the point. And then do you have a cheeky third part? Sorry. Fiscal rules. I think we've got to keep it simple, folks. We must not go bust. We've got to start earning more than we're spending, and that's going to be difficult. But you know, Lee and Zia gave a press conference last week about welfare. You know, we cannot keep going the way we're going and think that it's going to end well, because public sector spending is completely and utterly out of control. So let's keep it simple. Basic housekeeping. If we keep spending more than we're earning, and if we keep this massive off-balance sheet liability growing at 30 to 50 billion pounds, then our children or grandchildren at some point are not going to thank us.
Next.
Do you want the BBC?
Oh, who's here from the BBC? Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Tice. Harry Farley from BBC. You talked about thinking about good ideas, great ideas, and mad ideas. What would you say to those who say you're not auditioning to run a business anymore, you're auditioning to run government, and mad ideas can be dangerous in government? And secondly, just on the developments today about the prisoner accidentally released, can you just explain why you think that David Lammy should return and give a statement in the House of Commons?
Yeah, so look, the point is we're not in government, and we all know that when you're in government, the pressures are enormous. So this is the perfect time actually to step back and ask those questions. And when you've all set strategies in the boardroom, you know, you look at everything across the whole piece. That's what happens in business. And I think we've got to be much more willing to say, actually, maybe, I mean, the whole point of being in business is you come up with a great product, you go and sell it, and you make a profit, and you grow the value of that business. Maybe we need to be more business-like in government and say, actually, we've got to start running a lean, mean machine, and we've got to start earning more than we're spending and grow the value of the business of the United Kingdom, which is essentially our economy. Because if not, then some of you may remember that British Airways used to be described, I hope no one's up. British Airways 30 or 40 years ago used to be described as a pension fund with wings. We do not want the UK economy to be described as an unfunded pension liability with flaps. So, you know, we have to be brave enough to look at this differently. With regard to David Lammy, some of you may not be in the loop. He was asked by the shadow deputy at Prime Minister's questions today on I think 6 occasions whether he could guarantee that any other prisoners, asylum seekers, had been released by accident. And it turns out that we think that at least one, possibly more, I think it's evolving breaking news, Harry, you may have the latest, may have been released. So the question is, if David Lammy knew before he went into the House of Commons that information, then did he deliberately withhold that from the House of Commons, which, I'll be gentle about it, is at the very least poor form.
Thank you. A gentleman over here. Can we have a mic, please?
Well done, Richard. I just want to make
Name and
Peter Hall, private investor, an entrepreneur. I would just like to make a couple of points here about my experience as an Australian entrepreneur and investor. In Australia, we're not frightened to pay higher taxes. The corporate tax rate is 30%. And the top marginal rate is 48%. We're delighted to pay those taxes. I was a chairman of an Australian public company because dividends were tax-free to the extent at which you'd pay the company tax. So capital was injected into companies that paid tax in Australia. So we have to have some flexibility. And I totally agree with Nigel. We have to pay, have increased taxes until we've dealt with the debt problem. The second point is Australia has not had a recession for 40 years. And the reason is because we have a universal compulsory pension scheme. And we have 3 times as many publicly listed companies per capita as the United Kingdom. We have global unicorns and so on. So, and that deals with the problem of the growth in these hidden liabilities. So that must be a core part of the reform answer to Britain's problems. A compulsory universal pension scheme, which isn't, there's no cutouts for the public sector. We're all in the same boat together, to use a hero David Cameron's words.
Thank you. What do you say to that, Richard?
I think that's the point. You know, that's why, I mean, Peter, thank you so much. You know, I know you've got great ideas. That's why we need people to feed in these ideas. What's working the best in different countries? Take a step back and look at it. Look at the different tax structures. Look at the different regulatory structures. I think we've got that opportunity. I think it's probably almost unique. And let's use it. Let's not waste it. And so that's why we need everybody's help.
Great. Next question.
Do you want the ITV? Do you want?
Oh, yes, ITV, please. You have... No?
Who's ITV? Have we got ITV here? No, they've got a better invite.
Ah, well, you see, they didn't turn up. They were invited.
Hello, Richard. Dan Bloom from Politico. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things you said in your speech. On cash ISAs, Labour the government seems to be mulling cutting the limit from 20,000 to 10,000. Just wonder if you think that goes far enough. And on inheritance tax, I think you talked about getting rid of it entirely. Can I just check, his reform recommitting to that position?
Yeah, so on the issue of cash ISAs, I mean, in a sense, the bigger question is why would you give tax relief to leave your money sitting in cash? How does that help the growth of the UK economy? How does that help the growth of SMEs trying to raise long-term capital funding? I think that's the big question we've got to look at and ask. And I've had various people pitch that in, but also some people genuinely say, no, you absolutely must not restrict people to investing only in the UK. Perfectly valid argument. Let's hear those thoughts. I think that's the bigger thing than the threshold. But look, in a sense, some countries just have one single saving pot. The bigger question is, why have a separate pension pot and a separate ISA pot? Those, I think, are the things. Should we, for example, really think big and say maybe we should have a baby bond? I mean, the Tories almost went there with the Child Trust Fund. Again, got to look at it. Ask that question. I don't know the answer. And I know the good friends in the press always want a sort of definitive answer forever. Actually, I'm saying no, let's seek the best views and thoughts on that. And look, on inheritance tax, Zia put forward the Britannia card a couple of months ago, and it's a critical part of our objective. And we have to do that very, very fast, because otherwise we will keep losing people. We have to give people hope that it's worth staying in the UK or coming back to the UK and taking risk, investing here. Making money is a great thing. We should welcome it. We should celebrate it. We need a culture of making work pay, making risk pay, and being a successful entrepreneur pay.
Any more questions? Come on, from the audience. Over there, please.
Thank you. Paul Carew, First Base Hospitality. You mentioned in your speech SMEs being the bedrock of this country. I would say that hospitality is at the epicentre of all of that. And it's entrepreneurs like me that end up having to put my house on the line, worry about whether I'm going to meet my bills at the end of the month. I'm being squeezed by NI, business rates, VAT. What would you be looking to do to help us moving forward?
Great question. Monday morning, sir, clear your diary and come to our press conference specifically on SMEs, because it is a deep passion of ours, of Nigel's, and the overregulation, the employment rights bills affecting the ability to employ people. Hospitality is such a critical industry, particularly for young people, because when I see in Skegness, the biggest theme park operator, I call that hospitality. It's great fun. When they tell me that they've basically reduced their employment of seasonal workers by 10%, 30 young people didn't get their first seasonal job this season. They shut the theme park in the middle of holiday season for 2 days a week because of the NI increases. So we absolutely hear that and understand that. We've got a great family brewery, a Bateman's brewery, telling me all of these things. So we hear it loud and clear. And it's been a disastrous decision that the Chancellor has to reverse, but I fear that message is falling on deaf ears. It's a critical part of our villages, our market towns, our towns, and our cities, and it's most critical for young people.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left. Yes, gentleman at the back there, and then I'll come back to the press.
Thanks so much. So my name's Ben Wybrow. I work for Daiichi Sankyo, which is a Japanese pharmaceutical company. I think when we look at just some of your points you raised about deregulation, I think life science is an interesting one where there has been some really high profile disinvestments just in the past few months. Do you think that's solved by the measures you're talking about now, or is there something extra needed to bring back those companies and bring back manufacturing in the UK?
Thank you so much for raising a critical point. Some of our greatest companies changing their investment decisions, hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, going elsewhere because they basically viewed the UK as becoming uninvestable. That highlights the very point why we have to do this. And in that specific situation, again, we've got to ask serious questions about NICE, the way that we approve drugs for use by the NHS. We've got to ask serious questions of the MHRA. Are they acting fast enough, smart enough, quick enough? And obviously it's got to be safe, but not in healthcare, but in financial regulation, there's an expression, there's no point being the safest graveyard if everybody's left the city. Now, that's not the case in healthcare, but life sciences, we had the clinical trials, which was an incredible part of our industry 20 years ago. Much of it disappeared. So I'm hearing that message loud and clear from the pharma industry, the healthcare industry, and I just think we can do better. And it's a great opportunity, and we have to get that investment back. Otherwise, more and more people are saying we're going elsewhere.
Very quickly, one question from the gentleman at the back. Well, yes, you.
Thanks. Matthew Holhouse from The Economist. You've been very critical of the OBR's forecasts in the past. I think recently you said that they were on magic mushrooms. What?
Really?
Yes, in May 2025. What happens to the OBR under a reform government? Are you going to abolish it? Are you going to alter its mandate? Are you going to look to do something else, or do you keep it as it is?
Yeah, look, great question. I think that any Quango has got to justify their competence and the extent to which they're adding value. But who runs the economy? Who makes the decisions in this country? Is it the Chancellor and the government, or is it the OBR? Right? It should be the Chancellor and the Cabinet and the Prime Minister. And there's an old expression in business: advisors advise, directors decide. And we have to get to the point where advisors advise and ministers decide, as opposed to being, and this is going on, and I'm seeing it in councils, where essentially elected officers are being told by executives, well, this is our advice, and if you don't accept it, you might be sued or lose your indemnity. That is not right. And we have to change that mindset. So I'm sure there's lots of lovely, great people in the OBR, but some of their forecasting is bang on the money. But they were 15 billion out in 4 weeks on the scale and the size of our debt back at the time of the spring statement. I bounced out of the House of Commons and I said, these numbers are delusional on the debt. And to be 10% out in 4 weeks means that I suggest they've got more homework to do.
Right, okay, thank you. Well done, Richard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a great evening of questions. I would like to call on Nick Candy, who is the Treasurer for Reform UK, to make closing remarks. But first of all, thank you very much for coming in and
Thank
giving
you
us
for
your
having me.
time.
Thank you.